Hello everyone, this is Senor Quesada, and today you guys are going to learn about the present tense conjugation of stem changing verbs. On a piece of paper, you guys need to take notes on the topics I'm about to explain. You need to conjugate all my practice verbs, the ones I'm providing for you to practice. You need to highlight and underline any important questions or concepts, ideas. And finally, once you're done with all the practice and all the notes, make sure you take a picture of your notes and upload those pictures to Google Classroom so you can get full credit for this assignment. Let's begin. Last week in my last video, you guys learned about the infinitive, which is the basic form of the verb. And we learned about those three endings, AR, ER, and IR. We also learned about conjugations, and conjugations are the forms verbs take when we use them in sentences, and that is based on who is doing the action. You also learn about regular verbs, and those are verbs that follow a conjugation pattern. And remember, in regular verbs, the stem never changes, and the ending only changes based on who's doing the action. And finally, you guys learn that verbs are made of two different sections, the stem and the ending. Now, let's review verb conjugation, regular verbs, so you can remember. Number one, remember that when we conjugate verbs, we always keep the stem and we only change the endings. So, for example, if we have the verbs caminar, correr, and escribir, you can clearly see the stems and you can clearly see the endings for those three verbs. Now, remember that when we conjugate, we always start by doing this, which is using the pronouns. Remember that nosotros will not be used, so that's why it's crossed out. Now, once we have those pronouns, we start by keeping the stems. As you can see, all the stems are the same as in caminar. There were no changes to the stem. And then the next thing we do is just add the endings that go with AR verbs for caminar. Yo camino, tú caminas, usted, él, ella camina, share the exact same conjugation. Nosotros caminamos, ustedes, ellos caminan. When we want to conjugate ER and IR verbs, we pretty much do the same thing. We keep those stems, and all we do is change the endings. And as you can see here, you have all the endings for ER and IR. Most of them are pretty much the same with one exception. The nosotros form is different. As you can see, one is EMOS, the other one is IMOS. Other than that, all of them are exactly the same. Well, let's move on to the new information. Let's talk about stem changing verbs. First of all, a stem changing verb is a verb that suffers a change in the stem when it's being conjugated. Now, this change affects pretty much all the conjugations except the nosotros form. The nosotros form conjugation is going to keep the original stem and it's not going to change. Okay? One more thing about stem change verbs is that verbs follow the same ending as the regular verbs, the ones we saw in the previous slide. And finally, there are four types of stem changing verbs. Number one are verbs that change from E to IE. The second group, verbs that change from O to UE. Third group, changes from E to I. And finally, the fourth group changes from U to UE. And let's take a look at these verbs in detail. So let's begin with the first group. The first group is verbs that change from E to IE when conjugated. Now let's look at the verb preferir. As you can see, preferir, we have that stem, and then we have the ending. It's an IR ending. If it was a regular verb, we would just keep the stem the way it is, no changes. And the only thing we change would be the ending, right? That's what we learned last time. Well, this time is going to be a little bit different. So let's begin with, once again, the pronouns. And as you can see now, the stem is going to change. That E is changing from E to IE. And it's changing in most conjugations except in the nosotros form, like I said before. The nosotros form is actually keeping the original stem, no changes, just like that. Now, since this is an IR verb, all we need to do to conjugate it now or to finish the conjugation is add the endings that go with the IR ending verbs. And that's it. That's all you guys do to conjugate a stem changing verb. Now, make sure you guys take careful notes about this because on the next slide, I want to ask you to conjugate a few verbs that follow the exact same pattern where the E changes to IE. Now, before we move on, one more thing. If there is more than one E in the stem, then the one that changes is the one that's the closest to the end. As you can see in this verb, that's the one that was the closest to the end, so that's the one that changes. Okay, so let's move on then so you can practice. So these are the verbs that I want you to practice. As you can see, all these verbs are going to follow the exact same changes, and I already mark or change the color on the letter that's going to change in the stem. That E that's going to change from E to IE. So please pause the video, conjugate those three, and once you're done, come back to continue. Okay, since you're done, let's move on. Now, the second group of verbs are the verbs that change from O to UE when conjugated. Okay? Now, an example of this verb would be the verb probar. If you look at the verb probar, there is your stem once again, and there is your ending, AR ending. The O in the stem is the one that's going to change from O to UE when we start conjugating. So once again, we're going to start by looking at all those pronouns. When we add the stem, you can see the change it has from O to UE in most conjugations, except the nosotros one. Nosotros stays exactly the same, doesn't change. And once we have that, all we need to do is add the endings that go with AR verbs. Yo pruebo, tú pruebas, él prueba, nosotros probamos, ustedes prueban. And that is group number 2. Now, I want to give you a few verbs so you can practice it. And here they are. Notice that these 4 verbs that I'm about to give you are going to follow the exact same change from O to UE. So once again, start by doing the table with all the pronouns, change those U's to UE when you conjugate it, and make sure you add the correct ending for the verbs, AR, IR, ER, and ER. Make sure you follow those verbs for each one of those verbs. Now, please take a minute, pause the video, conjugate those verbs, and come back once you're done. Excellent. So if you're done, let's move on to the next group. Now, the next group is going to be verbs that change from E to I when conjugated. Now, let me give an example. The verb servir, once again, there is your stem and there is your ending. Once we start conjugating, once again, start with the pronouns. And like I said, this one is going to change from E to I, as you can see in those changes. One more time, nosotros form does not change, stays exactly the same. And all we need to do now is add the verbs that, or the endings that go with the IR verb, and that's it. We have it conjugated. Now, there is only one more verb that you guys need to practice that follows this pattern. And here it is. That's the verb pedir. That means to ask for or to order, like ordering something at a restaurant. So please pause it, conjugate the verb, and once you're done, come back so you can finish your notes. Excellent. Now that you are done with the first 3 groups, let's look at the 4th group. Now, the 4th group is going to be verbs that change from U to UE. And good news, there is only one in this slide, so I want to do it for you pretty much. The verb is one that you guys have seen before, and that's the verb jugar. And remember, jugar means to play a sport or to play a game, not to play an instrument. That's a different verb. Once again, there is your stem and there is your ending. Nothing different there. You guys already know that. And we're going to start one more time with those pronouns. You can see here the change from you to UE in the stem. And this is an AR verb, so all we need to do is add the AR endings. One more time, notice that the nosotros conjugation does not change at all. It keeps its stem, okay? Okay, guys, like I said, this is only one verb for this one. And there is it. These are the notes for today. So please remember, once you're done taking your notes and completing your practice verbs, make sure you highlight and underline important questions and ideas or concepts. And two, make sure you guys take notes and upload those, take pictures of your notes and upload those pictures to your classroom so you can get full credit for the assignment. If you have any questions, just send me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I will see you next class. Adios.